Hi, everyone. We're going to start in just a second here. Just want to make sure everybody gets into the session before we kick things off. So lovely to have everybody. We had a lot of people register for this event, so much interest, which we were thrilled to see. And we're going to kick it off in just a second. So just take a second to get settled. I love all the hellos in chat. It's a family already. That's awesome. All right, good. Well, let's go ahead and get started. So hello and welcome. We are thrilled that you have joined us for today's panel entitled The Future of the Counseling Profession. I just want to give a huge thanks to the American Counseling Association for partnering with us on today's event. We are thrilled to be joined by Richard Yep, the CEO of the American Counseling Association, as well as Dr. Rufus Spann, an ACA member, a licensed professional counselor. He's also a Motivo clinical supervisor. And I'm excited to have them both introduce themselves in just a moment. But before I do so, I just want to share a minute about Motivo and what the purpose is for today's event. So my name is Rachel McCrickard. I'm the CEO and founder of Motivo, and I'm also a licensed therapist. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Motivo, let me just quickly say that we are a virtual clinical supervision platform. We have a robust network of about 1,000 clinical supervisors licensed in all 50 states, and all of our supervisors are available for virtual clinical supervision. Our goal, we were really founded on the idea of accessible, affordable clinical supervision. ACA was one of our earliest partners, and we've had a long relationship with them that we've really enjoyed. You'd be welcome to visit our website to learn more about Motivo. It's wearemotivo.com. So today's event is in honor of April's Counseling Awareness Month, a month which is dedicated to highlighting and celebrating the counseling profession, which we all love so much, and sharing opportunities for growth and learning with peers in the counseling field. I want to give just a couple of housekeeping issues before we dive into the discussion. If you are interested in obtaining continuing education credit for today's event, please stay for the full session. You have to attend live in order to get continuing education credit. And at the end of this session, a survey will appear in your browser, just like magic. It'll just show up, and that must be completed in order to get continuing education credit. We're also going to paste the survey link in chat when we have about 5 minutes left. So either option, either in your browser or in chat, be sure you click on the survey and you complete it, and then your certificate will be emailed to you by ACA in June. We have a full agenda for today, so we will likely not be able to answer every live question, maybe any of the live questions. However, you are free to post a question in the chat, and either a representative of ACA or Motivo might be able to answer your question. And then if we have time, we'll certainly answer a few questions as well. So let's go ahead and dive in. Rich and Dr. Spann, thank you so much for being here and for taking time to share your insight about the future of our profession with us. Rich, let's start with you. Could you introduce yourself and share a little bit about your role at ACA?
Sure. Thanks, Rachel. I'm really honored to be with everyone here today. I have been with ACA for more than 30 years, believe it or not, 23 as the CEO. And while I started off in the public policy area, I now oversee all 60 employees, and I work closely with this year's ACA president, Dr. Sue Pressman, and our volunteer leadership in helping to implement the association's strategic goals. And as ACA CEO, I feel, it's my obligation to ensure that we develop those products and services and resources that can help the counseling profession. And just as background, in a former life, I worked in community service agencies and a minority AIDS project and provided direct services to youth through education and career programs. But I'm really happy to be with all of you today.
Thank you so much, Rich. So thrilled to have you, and thanks for your service for our profession, long career with the counseling profession. Dr. Spann, how about you? Could you introduce yourself and share a little bit about your professional experience as well?
Sure. So just a little bit about me. Currently, I am an assistant professor at the University of Southern California. I teach master level merging school counselors how to really interrogate spaces, think about social justice and equity. And I really am proud of that work and be in academia. I've been doing that for about 10 years, previously a department chair of a forensic psychology program and counseling psychology program. And I've been doing practice in the field of clinical counseling. So I've been doing that also about 10 years. So I've had a private practice doing great work around that. And then last but not least, I was working in the startup tech space with a tech team. We created a app that looks at culture and looking at culture first, working and supporting, particularly was looking at African-American men. Now we're looking at BIPOC, and it's telehealth as well as self-care. And I was the chief clinical officer in that capacity. So a little bit of different buckets, but been enjoying it all. So that's just a little bit about me.
I love that. It's so cool to see all the startups that are happening right now in the mental health field and all the interesting ways that we're being able to reach populations through, virtual care. So I love that. So a little bit about Counseling Awareness Month. Rich, I would love for you to talk about Counseling Awareness Month in general, why ACA designated this month as such, and really the intention behind this month-long event.
Sure. I always love talking about Counseling Awareness Month. You know, one thing about being at the same organization for a really long time is that you get to see the evolution of something. And in the case of Counseling Awareness Month, or CAM, the growth has been phenomenal. We started this like 20 plus years ago, and there were a lot of weeks that honored different professions and organizations. But I think to truly capture all of the depth and breadth of what counselors do, we wanted an entire month. So we created Counseling Awareness Month. And, I think that the fact that counselors are really good advocates for their clients and their students, but they're not always that good at advocating for themselves. And we wanted this to be a month in which they would be really proud of the things that they do to let their communities know. And so we designated that CAM would be a month in which we get to really toot the horn of professional counselors. And when I talked earlier about how it's evolved, I think, for example, we designate one day of Counseling Awareness Month as Teal Day, where people are supposed to wear the color teal to represent the profession and again, promote what it is they all do. And now we see selfies and things on social media about that. And it's just really amazing what that growth has been. So I'm real excited about it. It gets better every year. And if people want more information about it, they can go to the ACA website at counseling.org. And there's a lot of information there, things that they can download, things like that.
Oh, I love that. That's so great. I was just at CalPICS conference, California Association of Licensed Professional Counselors, a couple of weeks ago virtually. And, they were the last state to have the LPCC designation is what it's called there. And it's so interesting to think that our profession, as much history as it has, it's still in its infancy in a lot of ways, in the way that we are developing a language around, who we are as counselors, but then also how we advocate on behalf of the profession and further the work of counselors, nationwide within the field. So this month certainly supports those efforts. Dr. Spann, as an ACA member and also as a counselor yourself, I know you've participated in events for Counseling Awareness Month. How have you seen this month bolster the awareness of the profession?
What I see and what I appreciate the most, particularly talking to other speakers that have been presenting virtually and created a recording for the actual Awareness Month, really diving into what are the actual current issues that they're living through and how they've experienced the pandemic, how they've experienced a lot of the trauma, and then speaking through themselves and expressing that to other counselors. I think when we think about solidarity, I think that's really it. When I'm speaking about my truth and my authenticity, not just from a lived experience, but also from a shared experience, we're all collectively going through this, particularly as counselors, as we've gone through a pandemic and there's a major uptick on those looking for services. It's impacted us. And also knowing that although we're not at the front line in some ways, but we're still a part of this process of serving and promoting and continuing care of health. And I think that's what I'm seeing, is that there's this level of supporting through solidarity and connectedness and what that means for me as a counselor, and then for the next counselor that's next to me, and if not physically next to me, virtually next to me, and sharing that with others.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, that makes me think too of the fact that, counselors so often work in professional silos. We are helping so many people, but oftentimes we don't have those opportunities, those easy opportunities for connection with other peers, and for the reminder that, there's other people who are going through very similar work that we are doing as well. So I feel like Counseling Awareness Month definitely helps me feel less alone as a counselor and more solidarity across the miles. So I love that. I want to also talk about the impact of COVID this last year on people's mental health. You guys know this has been all over the news. They talk about mental health as the second pandemic. It has really increased the number of people who wanted to get mental health care. And I think just about everybody has probably felt mental health struggles. I know I personally have on some level during this last year. So I would love to know from you, Rich, how have you seen the pandemic shift just the overall perception of the counseling profession? Do you think that there's been a reduction in stigma because of this last year?
That's a great question. And I think that's something we're going to continue to explore as we move through the pandemic and then in that post-pandemic world that we talk about. I think that the shift in perceptions about counseling in regard to how it helps people face life's challenges, that had been developing gradually. But there's no doubt that, with the pandemic, that became much more pronounced. And so whether it focused on career or personal relationships, isolation because of having to shelter in place, or racial unrest, or just health and well-being in general, I think people have come to realize that talking to a professional can be really beneficial. So, seeking the help of a professional counselor or marriage and family therapist, whatever, is much more acceptable than it was previously. And, I think it also helps that so many public figures have stepped up to say what their experience has been. So, from my vantage point, for many of us of a certain generation, our first exposure to counseling was really from our school counselor. And in the old days, when they called them guidance counselors, that was a much different thing than what they do now. And Dr. Spann can certainly, elaborate on all of that in terms of school-based professionals. So I think the pandemic has clearly raised that visibility of what professional counselors, whether they're in an educational setting or community setting or private practice, can really do to help people. So I'm excited by it because I think it's time. And, I certainly look forward to more people taking that step of seeking the help of a professional counselor.
I love that. Yeah, agreed. Shout out to my therapist out there. It's incredible to have someone, I'm sure many people on this webinar will relate to that. Just having someone that you can talk through some of those struggles with it's such an important thing. It's a necessary thing. It's part of an overall healthy lifestyle, I think. Dr. Spann, I'd love to ask you the same question, really from the perspective of a LPC. What would you add? What have you seen in your own practice?
I can say one, just an uptick in clients. And so that has been somewhat of a great thing to see that there's more people coming in for therapy, but then it's also caused somewhat of a guilt because I can't see all the clients that are coming to my door at this point. And I've tried referring them to other counselors and their cases are full. And it also shows that there's not enough counselors and not enough mental health professionals to service. And I always say, until we get to one-to-one capacity, for every counselor, for every mental health professional to one client, then we still have a lot of work to do. However, I know that right now for many practices, because we've reduced the barriers to access, and that's just a big thing. If we think about distance is a barrier. If I'm 100 miles away, nobody's somebody may come 100 miles to see me, but at the same time, most likely that may be a challenge for somebody. So if we're thinking about time, distance, those barriers have been reduced. In addition to that, a big major barrier is insurance. Insurances have gotten on board during the pandemic that allow for people to tap into their insurance to telehealth and virtual. And so with those differences being reduced, you have a lot more clients coming in. And so I think that shift in how people see therapy, and that not just for those that have the finances and or ability to make time, I'm finding that more people are thinking about it in a different way, the accessibility of it, and not just from major platforms that offer those opportunities through telehealth, but seeing their private practitioners offering that, and hopefully that being a continuation. I know we prefer sometimes to be in person so that we get that energy. However, I always think about what is it to make sure that we're in service and making sure that clients have access to us. And so I think that will change the topography and the landscape as we move forward. So that's what I'm seeing so far right now.
Yeah, access is such a critical thing, isn't it? Not just access to a counselor, but access to the right kind of counselor for you. You know, we saw this a lot on Motivo in the early days, and even still, people who were driving a long distance, not just because there wasn't a supervisor nearby, but because there wasn't a supervisor of color nearby, or there wasn't a supervisor who, you know, could assign, you know, ASL, or who, you know, worked with immigrant families. All of those things. I think that access piece is so huge right now for finding the right counselor for each and every person, because there could be people who'd be driving 100 miles to see you because they want to see you, you know, and what you have to offer. So that really leads us well into this next question around the impact of COVID on how we deliver counseling services. So a year ago, right now, we were all shifting very quickly to predominantly online practices. And I think, you know, I've said before that I think like it was like 10 years of telehealth progress in like 60 days, you know, because every therapist had to create a virtual option, or most did. So many people have said this has led to an inflection point in telehealth that would have taken many years to reach this point. And I'd love to hear both of your thoughts. Dr. Spann, let's start with you. How did this change your practice from a delivery of services perspective?
That's a great question. You know, and being a supervisor myself at the time, you know, I was telling all my supervisees as we were practicing in a hybrid model, some in the office and some virtually, I would say, you know, you never know if there's going to be this winter storm that's going to come by and maybe your client can't get to your office. Never knew it was going to be a pandemic that would have changed that. So the leverage that we were using it as an alternative. And now it's the alternative that we're using for the most part. And so what I would say to that is I love it. Again, I think it's helped to do some culture shifting. And what I mean by that is for some individuals, they don't want to show up at the office. They don't want to be seen at the office. And that could be for many different stigmas or reasons why they don't want to be there. But I do know this, I've seen an uptick for African-American men receiving access and seeing me, which has been beautiful. I've seen where couples, due to many reasons for the pandemic and being enclosed with each other, have seen more services. And so what I love about this is just speaking from the perspective as an African-American male and being in an African-American community, I have seen a change and a shift for African-Americans, at least in my practice and talking to other clinicians, seen an uptick in that. And so if there's any way that I can create a firestorm and continue that momentum, I would love to do that, because that is what we were looking for. And you're right, Rachel, I think it would have taken a very long time to get here. But Hurdle, the platform that I was working with, we really were trying to get what were the barriers to the access and how do we get more people into teletherapy. And lo and behold, it was a pandemic that did it. And now we have this just a total different mindset. But I want to capture that. I don't want to let this go, because we can quickly shift back into an ideal set that this isn't for me. I don't want to go to an office, or there are other barriers. But if we're able to promote that in a healthy way for clinicians as well as our clients, I think we can continue to shift the culture and see more people on the spectrum of from BIPOC, QT BIPOC, in services and getting the access that they need.
Wonderful. And Hurdle, what is the website for that?
It's actually hurdle.co. Very easy to get to. Check it out, please. It actually is very informative, not just if you want to do teletherapy, but looking at wellness and other opportunities for articles.
Excellent, excellent. How about you, Rich? What have you seen at ACA about the delivery of services and how that's changed?
Oh, well, I mean, it's been amazing, right? I mean, in terms of telebehavioral health and the technology that makes it possible compared to what we saw in that field just a few years back, I mean, it's like the teleporter on Star Trek. It puts a counseling professional in front of a client anytime, anywhere, any place. And the challenge is ensuring that when mental health professionals practice in a highly technological and virtual space, that they know how to adhere to the rules of the road.
Mhm.
And it isn't simply the same as face-to-face in-person sessions, and it can clearly be as effective, if not more so in certain cases, but the counselor needs to know how to adapt
Mhm.
to what they know to today's virtual world. And that's one of the reasons why when the pandemic really started to ramp up, ACA provided 30 continuing education credits of courses that focused on how to practice telehealth. And we made those sessions available at no cost as a public service to the counseling profession. And I can tell you that within the first 6 months, we've had more than 32,000 counselors sign up for those. So that tells us something, right? Not only do people want to get better at it, but that there's a need for people to be more highly trained in doing that. So my advice is that professional counselors need to continue to embrace technology, given the access it's going to provide to clients and students who otherwise would not be able to receive those services. And I think it's really incumbent on professional counselors to know as much as they can about how to practice in this whole arena of telebehavioral health.
Yes, absolutely. Only thing that I would just tack on to that too is that I think, counselors have really done a good job of adapting to the world of teletherapy. I think many of them have incorporated this into their practice. And I was talking to my therapist about this recently, and she said, I'll probably never go back to exclusively in-person practice. Partially because I prefer it, she prefers it as a clinician, but also because her clients almost demand it now. Like they just expect it, and so I think that piece has happened now too, that people expect their providers to be virtually available in a way that maybe 2 years ago there wasn't that same expectation. So yeah, it certainly has changed a lot about our profession. And that piece of access, Rich, I think really applies to this next question, which I'm really excited to ask about. And it's about the counseling compact. So, I'm licensed in Georgia, and I think Georgia was the first state to sign the counseling compact. I know that doesn't start right away. So I would love for you to kind of clear up any misconceptions about what is the counseling compact and how is it going to affect the future of the profession?
I love talking about the counseling compact. So thanks for asking. We know that for example, that there are deficits in the mental health delivery service system across the nation. And, the need for telehealth or being able to practice in one state but have a client in another state, I mean, that is something that needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. And so for years, our leadership at ACA would hear these horrendous stories, right, about counselors who, for one reason or another, needed to relocate to another state. And when they did, they would be subject to the challenges of applying for a license as if they had never been licensed before. So it was like starting at square one on the path to licensure for counselors who may have been licensed at the highest level in their home state for many, many years. And we realized that just wasn't fair. And so we knew that some type of agreement between states was needed. So the board studied the issue and came up with a solution that would be modeled after other professions who have compacts, and like nurses and speech pathologists and others. And so the idea is to have states come together as what we call a compact, and that those states in the compact agree to recognize a license granted by a member state. So for example, Rachel, if you live in Georgia and Georgia is a member of the compact and you want to move to Tennessee and Tennessee is a member of the compact, Tennessee would recognize your license to practice. So that results really in a privilege that would be granted to a counselor who wanted to practice in any state who was part of the compact. So compacts really provide kind of like a pathway for counselors to move seamlessly from one state to another through this agreement among all those states who are part of the compact. So the ACA Governing Council, because they knew how important this was, voted to pursue an interstate counseling compact and allocated up to $600,000 for us to get that process up and running. And this was the largest single program allocation ever made by our board, and it serves as kind of like an indicator of how important it is to us. So the draft compact language was approved by the Counseling Compact Advisory Board. That was comprised of counselors and attorneys and elected representatives and folks like that. They approved all of that by December of last year. And now, as you noted, we have 2 states, Maryland and Georgia, where the compact bills have been approved by the legislatures. And those bills are now sitting on the desks of their governors, waiting for them to be approved. They're signed into law. So we also have other states who've begun drafting legislation to reflect being part of the compact. And those bills are also in committee. So what this means is that in our first 4 months, we're hopeful that, you know, the full complement of 10 states, which is what you need to make the compact operational, is something that we think can be achieved by 2022. So I just want to reiterate, this type of legislation is certainly something that helps professional counselors, but it also increases the amount of providers who are available in a state where those services are needed. So if anybody needs more information, there is a website that was created. It's at counselingcompact.org. And that has all sorts of information for counselors to review and be advocates of.
That's fantastic. Wow. I can see the chat blowing up about this as well. It would be such a wonderful thing. And, you know, even from my perspective as a counselor, that you know, I think that sometimes we had to do a workaround around this, or I saw other counselors doing this with like calling it life coaching or something like that, just to be able to practice where they wanted to. You know, I've never done that. I don't know much about it, and I don't have anything to really say about it, but I just think we need to be able to serve people in, you know, any state and any way to do that, so that we don't have to call ourselves something else, you know, in order to do it. I think is such an important initiative. Dr. Spann, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. How would this impact the way that you and your colleagues deliver care?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, you know, and being in Maryland, in the other state that's in the compact, I'm ecstatic to hear that Maryland is a part of that. Really just a progressive state when it looks at things like that. And the way I look at it is that, particularly if we're looking at, you know, people of color, African Americans, what Hurdle was looking at is that you have African Americans that are primarily in a certain amount of states, like including Georgia, we're talking about Texas, Maryland. However, when we think about the amount of counselors of color, particularly Black African-American counselors, it's a very small percentage. And so what we do know is that as self-selecting, where some clients want to see an African-American counselor, however, we know that in each state, there's maybe not enough African-American counselors. Having a compact such as this could be helpful in saying that we could see that if a client wanted to have a particular therapist. And for an example, now once all this is finalized and the ink dries, I could support those that are in Georgia, or let's say in the Atlanta metro area. And so it just shows that what we're doing again is breaking down barriers and allowing access, and also where there may be a small percentage of counselors that may be where the client is self-selecting and looking for a particular counselor, we're broadening that. So I'm always looking at the nuance of something. How does this go into where we're thinking about creating equity or equality in particular providing services? I think this gets down to it. And so I'm really happy to see that ACA has really championship that and done the fight. And even at the state level, there's a lot of work for the divisions, state of Maryland, Maryland Counseling Association, just kind of fighting and backing that. But so thankful for Governing Council and ACA for championship in this.
Oh, great. Yes, yeah. Agreed. And I'm curious too, I'm not sure if you know this, Rich, maybe we could have one of our representatives put it into the chat, but if someone wanted to like further these efforts, is there like a petition, or how could we support the effort of the Counseling Compact?
Definitely go to that website that I just mentioned, counselingcompact.org. There's lots of information there on how to get involved and things that you might want to do as an individual counselor.
Excellent. That's great. Good. Shifting focus a little bit here, we want to talk about three more things just to know where we are in the session. We're going to talk a little bit about Medicare and some recent changes happening there. We're going to talk about racial and social justice and a counselor's response to that. And then we're going to also talk about professional self-care, and then we'll wrap up. So let's go with Medicare. Rich, can you talk about some of the changes that might be coming and what that might mean for counselors?
Sure, happy to. The Medicare issue is one that ACA has been working on for many years. And what we're basically saying is that if a client has been seeing, let's say, an LPC or an MFT for a number of years, and that client becomes enrolled in Medicare, the counselor is not included as an independent provider of services under Medicare, which means they can no longer be reimbursed for those services. So that means the counselor then has to make a decision to either terminate that relationship or provide the services at no cost. We believe that's wrong. Professional counselors have the training and the expertise, the licensing, credentialing that is on par with the other mental health professionals who are included, such as psychologists and social workers. Congress has been a bit slow to include LPCs and MFTs as eligible providers, which is why ACA always has this at the top of its public policy agenda, because we think it's so important. And it's not just a guild issue to benefit counselors or marriage and family therapists, but it's also an access issue for those who need services, especially in rural areas where there is certainly a lack of providers. So currently there is a coalition of organizations that include ACA, AAMFT, the American Mental Health Counselors Association, and the National Board for Certified Counselors, and others. And we've been working as a Medicare Mental Health Workforce Coalition to have LPCs and MFTs included. And each Congress, right, we get a little bit closer. And so in the 117th Congress, we're feeling hopeful of continuing to build that momentum. And again, whether you're an ACA member or not, I would really encourage you to contact your elected officials in the House and in the Senate to urge them to support including LPCs and MFTs in Medicare as independent providers.
It's way past due, isn't it? It's something that, I know that, and I'm so grateful for ACA and AAMFT and what you guys have been doing to advocate. I know I'm an MFT, and so I went on behalf of Tennessee, I think a couple of years ago, to lobby about this. And it was such a cool experience. MFT set it up for me and gave me the talking points and talked to your representatives. And it is such an important thing for us to all know that we have a voice in the future of our profession, and that we can talk to our representatives about what we need on behalf of the profession. So that's great words. Dr. Spann, how about you? I would love to know how the ability to accept Medicare would impact the profession from a counselor's perspective.
I think in many ways, just kind of even noting what I'm seeing from the chat is that, it just helps us to continue to be able to receive the funds and to continue to make sure our practices are being supported. The way I look at it is I look at it from a standpoint that, when a client comes and reaches out to me, or when people reach out, they don't get into the nuances of why there's policy or why Congress can't fix this, or what are the issues behind the door. They're looking for help. And so it's very disheartening when I can't even explain why there is just a division on why LPCs and MFTs cannot get recognized in that capacity. What they're looking for is, how can I get services? How can I get help? And why can't I get help from you? And so I think that's the part that tugs at my heart the most, is that I know that there's this inner working that's happening. And I love that, again, that ACA and a lot of the other organizations are championing that, because we need that. And I just always think about the actual clients and the people that are coming to my door, where, as Rich was saying, it'd be maybe an offer for free or a sliding scale almost to very little, to make sure that services are there. But as I mentioned before, there's still not enough mental health professionals to see all of the nation. And so what we're finding is that now we're reducing the ability to see clients. And so I think that's the hardest part, knowing that there's this larger political issue going on, but really at the minute level, when I'm talking to somebody over the phone, that comes up. And so there's just a different feeling and conversation and energy that happens in that moment that has nothing to do with politics.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Thanks for your thoughts on that. So this next issue, another issue of access, counselors' response to racial and social injustice. So this last year, the general public has become much more aware of the systemic racism that's existed our entire history, and the impact of white privilege with the killing of George Floyd, with Breonna Taylor and others. We've seen an increase in violence directed towards BIPOC as well as Asian American Pacific Islander population too. So I've seen ACA take a very vocal stance on this, which I have so appreciated. And I'd love to know from you, Rich, what role do you see ACA playing in continuing the fight against systemic racism?
Yeah, thanks for asking. It obviously has taken up a large part of our agenda over the past year. And, part of that is because we are on record. ACA is on record as including social justice in our mission. And that being the case, we are mandated to do what I can and what all of us can to raise awareness, to call out injustices when recognized, and to really explore our own systems and processes to uncover and address any bias that may be present. And so these are clearly very challenging times, and issues around racial injustice and systemic racism are things that our members need to understand, and how best to advocate for their clients and their students when these issues arise. And so I'm extremely proud of the positions that our governing council has taken relative to the role that professional counselors play in reconciliation and awareness. And so the staff and I take our orders from the governing council, and they have continued to press forward in these areas, so the staff will do so as well. And the governing council, again, under the leadership of our president, Dr. Sue Pressman, approved an anti-racism action plan, and then took what I felt was an unprecedented step in the middle of a fiscal year to allocate more than $100,000 to implement various steps within that plan that will look at how to ameliorate racism within the profession and ACA, and to oversee our activities and hold us to the commitments we're making. President Pressman appointed a very distinguished group of counselors who will serve as our first ever anti-racism commission.
Love that. I love that. I love the intentional language as well behind it, calling it what it is. That's wonderful. Dr. Spann, as a clinician of color, what has your experience been like this last year? What progress have you seen occurring, and what do you feel like the role of counselors is in bringing about future change?
Good question. At least talking about what's happening right now in the AAPI community, and when we think about the racial hate and violence that's going on, I can say that with other colleagues coming together, particularly Dr. Christian Chan heading for the Association for Aging and Adult Development, pulling other counselors together in solidarity to talk about this issue and to spread the word. And I think that is one thing that I love is solidarity. If it's not one community that's being affected, it's another community. And when we come together, we actually have a stronger voice and we can amplify voices. And that's really the importance behind the work that we're doing. And so when we can continue these kind of conversations and not allow them to be in silos, we show that, hey, this is something that we're very aware of, as well as how do we continue to provide resources and support and show the nation and our communities that this is something that we are concerned about as counselors, as well as just being concerned about it because it's a community that we may live in or be a part of. So I do see that. I would encourage that other counselors continue to have these conversations at the state level, the national level, internationally, and don't let it just be in pockets or silos. The more we're talking about this, the more we're addressing it, putting spotlights in other areas, I think that's going to make a difference. People are going to realize that this is not something that goes unseen and unheard and in silence, but that we're acknowledging, recognizing it, and we're going to continue to talk about it as much as we can. And then after that, we're going to put action to it. And so the action continues to to put action behind the talk. And so I think that's really important. Now, thinking about what's been happening, particularly to African-American community and what we've seen with George Floyd, and then the continued violence, as well as what's just recently happening with the trial, I found myself as a counselor and being an African-American male being very impacted by that. I can tell you that my emotions, as well as my identity, has been impacted within 72 hours, just with what's happening with the verdict. And thinking about how this is one moment, but knowing that there's been many years and many moments of injustice that's happened. And so what I do a lot for myself is I do a lot of self-care. I do a lot of reaching out to other brothers and sisters and checking on them and making sure that I'm making sure that they're okay, as counselors, as family members. But I find that what I'm doing is a lot of tuning in and fine tuning where I'm at with my emotions and how I show up for my clients that are also impacted by everything.
Yeah, well said. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. Maybe I just will offer too that Motivo has also been engaged in this conversation in two specific ways with peer groups. We have two peer groups addressing this issue. One is a BIPOC peer consultation group that's led by Dr. Makunga Akinyela in Georgia, and he leads it every other Wednesday. It's free. It's open to any counselor who identifies as BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, if you're unfamiliar with that acronym. And then we have another one that's led by Dr. Jean Combs and Jill Friedman, two of the foremost thought leaders in narrative therapy right now. And they lead one on examining white privilege. And it is for white identifying counselors who are invested in their own work around anti-racism. Completely free, available to anybody. I'll have Mac list it on the chat there, and we'd love to have you join one if it sounds like something that would be beneficial to you. So this other issue around professional self-care, I think this dovetails off of the last question quite nicely. We've seen a lot of topics covered today, and one that is apparent is the importance of our profession at this particular point in history and really sustaining ourselves. I always think about the fact that, the best tool that a counselor has is really themselves, what that relationship is between themselves and their clients, which has a really, roots in how well and healthy the clinician is themselves. My graduate school required us to attend our own counseling, and I saw it as such a benefit to me to know what it's like to be in the client's chair and to do my own work around differentiation and person of the therapist type work. So investing in your own self-care so that you can defend against burnout it's essential for us to be able to maintain our own health and well-being. So Rich, let me ask you, what advice would you have for counselors today about how they can create the time and the space for their own self-care?
Easy. No. Unplug, disconnect, find space for yourself. These are three things that I think professional counselors have to do in order to show up and be present for their clients and students. There are times when professional counselors just need to take a break from all they're doing professionally. And that doesn't mean going and volunteering and doing more work that a counselor does, right? It means totally disconnecting for a little while and having that space. And it's more than just an okay thing to do. I'd say it's part of what makes you a whole person and someone who can do their best for the people that they're working with. And so, I always say, giving your best means not giving what's simply left over.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love the word unplug too. I think that's I was talking to one of my friends about this yesterday about how, we are accessible now and have been for many years because of smartphones to our work computer, our work identity, all of the time. So that's not going anywhere. And it's really contingent upon us individually to make the choices that we need to. For instance, I charge my phone intentionally on the other side of the room so that when it's over there charging, I don't even have access to it. But putting in those little pieces, I think, are so important for us to intentionally remove the temptation to be plugged in. So I think that's harder for some than it is for others. It's certainly difficult for me because I notice that when I'm not doing something, I feel like I'm not being productive. And I forget that being not productive is one of the best things I can do for myself and for my clients as well. Dr. Spann, how about you? What have you found to be helpful in your own self-care practices?
One is an acronym that I got from a colleague, and I want to just kind of publicly shout her out, a colleague from Hopkins. And what she said was, well, she got it from somebody else as well, but it's busy. And it's because you said yes. So busy because you said yes. And I'm sure others have probably heard this. It swirls around, but it didn't really set with me until I realized, yeah, that's what's happening. Yes doesn't have to be in the 3 letters. It's in so many other things that I do, and just making myself overly accessible or putting myself into spaces where I knew that could be a moment of having self-care, but I didn't take care of that. And so I had to realize that boundaries were so important, and that because of the access that we have now, that I am more accessible to others in my life, not just clients, but accessible to a lot of people in my life. And I have to be able to be okay with saying no, nope, or however I want to say it, and not feel guilty about that, and realize that it's also part of the self-care process. So that's something that I've had to really come to terms with, and not deal with guilt or deal with shame around that process. The other thing is what I would say is 5 things that I do in my life, and maybe this could be shared for others. And somebody passed this on to me, and so I stole that one as well. So it's 5 things that you can do. 1, drink water as much as possible. 2, eat fresh food. So you should get as much fresh food as possible. There you go, take a sip. 3, make sure that you get movement in your life. So if that means that you're gonna have a silent party with your headphones on, or turn on some Frankie Beverly and Maze, which I'm going to do, that's something else that I do. 4, make sure that you get rest. That's one thing I learned from college: get enough rest and then take the test, right? And then last but not least, 5, this is so important: get in touch with nature. Go outside, put your feet on the grass, walk around, smell the air, walk your dog, whatever that may be. But if you're able to do these 5 things, you probably will have a great chance of having a healthy, long longevity in life. And so I keep them and I embody them. And it's something that I wanted to share.
I love that. I've not heard that busy acronym before, because you said, yeah, I love that. That's exactly right. And I'd say for me, it's one of the things I've learned through COVID is how comfortable I've gotten with saying no, because it's very easy to blame every no on the pandemic right now, but I enjoy saying no, and really being careful about how I spend my time. The other thing I just wanted to note there, because we have a couple of minutes I can see, is that I was listening to this Brene Brown podcast. I'm sure many of you guys know her, her podcast, Unlocking Us. And she was interviewing these recent authors about completing the stress cycle. I can't remember the name of the book, but I'll find it and put it in the chat. Completing the stress cycle, meaning that stress can live in your body. When it gets in there, it stays in there, and it needs an outlet in order to leave the body. And she talked about it in the animal kingdom, in the sense that, like, I can notice my dog when she gets a little stressed out about something, she'll like shake her little body to like get it out when she's had a big encounter with a big dog or something like that. And it just makes me realize every day that I have to complete the stress cycle. If I just let it sit there, for me, it's like going running in the evening time, but could be just like an evening walk or cooking dinner or whatever it is. Completing that stress cycle is so important to move beyond what has been staying inside of you. So great thoughts there, both of you guys, on self-care. And let's get to some concluding thoughts, and we'll see too. Yeah, if I see people are putting some notes about that book. If you know it, please put it in there, because I'll have to go and look for it. But some concluding thoughts that about counselors today, things that they can do to support and advocate for the profession. Dr. Spann, what would you say? How can people get involved in the future of the profession?
Well, small plug, June 7th, virtual day on the Hill. There's no excuse: rain, snow, if there's snow in your area, shine, whatever. You can virtually get on there and make sure that your voices are heard. You show up in solidarity. Meet your local Congress person if it's that part of the go round. I was able to meet Christopher Von Hollen when I was at the virtual day. Great person. So there's something that you can learn from that and be a part of other counselors. So if that's something you can check out. The other thing I would say is get involved at the state level. Really get involved at the state level. That was so important for me as I did and became the Maryland Counseling Association president. I was able to make impact and change and see other counselors and be able to do that in, as I say the word all the time, solidarity. And that was so important for me. And I grew from there. And I think that's what we should continue to do, grassroots levels, and continue to make sure that that happens. Say this last piece before I give it over to Rich. Also check on each other. Check on your fellow counselors. You know, if we don't do it, nobody else may will. I don't believe that's the case, but at the same time, that should be our charge. And so what I would say to you all right now is text somebody. Say, how are you doing? Just thinking about you, to a fellow counselor that you've been speaking to maybe already, or somebody that you haven't spoken to in a while. Say, I'm just thinking about you. I care about you. Just letting you know that you're on my mind. If we're all doing that, it just can start a storm of continuing this CAM, right? And continuing that self-care that we can have internally. And I'll make sure I check out some of my other friends as well.
Love that. How about you, Rich? What would you say? Final thoughts would you have?
Well, one thing I definitely want to do is thank you, Rachel, and Motivo for making this session available. I'm watching the chat, and I read pretty fast, but I don't read that fast. There's all sorts of really good stuff coming out there. And, I think that overall, the counseling profession is at an amazing point in history right now, right? And ACA obviously wants to do whatever we can to support its members and the entire profession. And that's why I really appreciate being able to talk about these issues today. We also know that we all need to adapt to the circumstances we're in. We are not going to be going back to just the way it was before January of 2020. And so to be open to adapting and to be open to, as Dr. Spann says, contact your friends, contact your colleagues, check in, use technology for things like that, I think is really important. I will tell you that we've had to make significant changes. Like for 400 days, the ACA staff has been working from home, and I don't really think we've skipped a beat in terms of the things that we've had to do. For almost like 70 years, right? ACA has had a traditional in-person annual conference. And that changed in 2020 because we had to cancel. And then by adapting to an online platform for this year, we now have like over 300 education sessions that are running all month, all during April, for people that register for the ACA virtual conference experience. And if you register for that by the end of this month, you get to watch all of those on demand during the month of May as well, because we know that we need to meet our members any place, anytime, anywhere. And so, I will tell you that I'm really happy the fact that we have over 6,000 registrants for this virtual conference right now, which is more than we've had at any event in the last 30 years. And I know, because I've been around for 30 years, right? And counselors are a resilient bunch. I've been around all of you for so long, and you are adaptable. And one thing that hasn't changed, but that I think is even more important today is, the message that counselors need to know when to stop and take care of themselves. If there's information that we have that can be helpful, I hope that attendees on this webinar will, check out our website at counseling.org, whether you want to know more about the Medicare issue we talked about, or what we're doing around racism, the virtual conference, or even telebehavioral health. Just, reach out. And I guess last but not least, after being part of the ACA family for 30 plus years, I am prouder than ever of what professional counselors are doing right now. Their role in society cannot be underestimated nor taken for granted. And professional counselors really are the key to improving society, one person at a time, as we say.
I love that. That's so great. So well said. And thank you for sharing about that ability to attend trainings virtually through the rest of the month. Many people, I was looking in the Q&A, were asking about ongoing learning opportunities. So I think that that's a great plug for that. We do have a couple of more minutes. So I did pick out a couple of questions that I saw in the chat, two of them that kind of kept getting asked. So we'll have to just kind of fly by the seat of our pants and see if we can answer these. And they'll mostly go to you, Rich. So if you can't answer it, just say can't answer it. But one of the questions I saw asked a lot was how telehealth and reimbursement models might look after the pandemic. What does ACA know about that?
We know that we want to initiate conversations as quickly as possible with insurance companies. We want to make sure that because we're not changing what are in the licenses for every state. All this is that privilege to practice in another state. So these people who are getting reimbursed, you've already jumped through all the hoops that you should have jumped through to be reimbursed. But that is a second part of what we have to do, and we will follow up on that.
That's great. That's great. And then the other question, this is very selfish for me because I'm curious about this too. Does the counseling compact, will that have any bearing on supervision over state lines for those states? Do you know?
Again, this focuses specifically on the part that grants the privilege of somebody who's already been licensed for a long time. We don't go in to change anything relative to supervision at this point.
Got it. Got it. Super helpful. So I'm going to put a few links in our follow-up that we've recorded this. We'll download it. We'll put it in the link for you. You can watch it again and again. We're also on Facebook Live, which I've never done before. So I think you can see it there as well. But the links that I'll put in is Hurdle, which Dr. Spann talked about. I'll put the counseling compact link. I'll put our link to our peer groups and anything else that maybe I didn't catch. We'll include that as well. I just appreciate both of you so much for taking time for this. I think I've learned a lot, and it's been very concise questions too, which I think has been very helpful to just hear your high level thoughts on a lot of these issues, but I think it's been very valuable, and I hope other people have felt the same. So thank you, Dr. Spann. Thank you, Rich. Let me just give a pause because there's a CE link in chat and I can see everybody saying thank you. So thanks for all the thank yous, but make sure you click on that link, find the link that Katrina has likely posted. I'm just going to give time for everybody to get that link. It will also show up in your browser after we end the webinar, but I want to make sure that everybody has time to see the link. Everybody's asking for the link again, so let's just give it a second and make sure everyone has the link. Let me also say thank you to Laura. Laura, thank you so much for being here and for interpreting. That's great to have that as well. All right, we're gonna close out. I think everybody has the link. If you don't have the link, Rachel at wearemotivo.com. You can get me directly, Rachel at wearemotivo.com. I'll shoot it over to you. So just let me know there. Thank you all. It's Friday, like Friday afternoon. So please enjoy your weekend. And thank you again so much for being here.
Thank you.